Yeah, I come from jazz radio, so I always dive right in. It's always like the hi-hat hits, and I run for it.
I miss jazz. I did jazz radio in college, and it was such a happy time.
Isn't it
Except,
fun to
oh
curate
god,
all that? Man,
yeah. Well, we had this amazing library of a lot of LPs with old Blue Note records.
yeah,
They were just so there's some of the old jazz LPs were just beautiful,
they
and the
were.
liner notes were like you could learn so much from the liner notes. I remember like reading Olay and Kind of Blue and all the things you'd learn. It was so much fun.
You know, the thing about jazz radio, I got into sports broadcasting, and I was like, I can't do
Before or after?
before. So when I
Okay.
was in college and all of that, that was my dream was to be on the set of Sports Center, ESPN Sports Center, whenever I got to that point. And then I got on the inside and I saw how it rolled, and I was like, man, I don't want to be chasing the star of these guys. It's just it's too much, and most of them have scripts they go off of. There's nothing truly authentic. So I was like, I got to get out. I got to detox. So I got out. And one day I had a really bad construction summer, and I went and I got one of those raccoons that Radio Shack used to sell with the radio in its belly. So, all right.
I just Radio Shack took me back far enough. I have to remember. I don't remember the
Yeah.
raccoons
They had a raccoon and you like had a little radio in its
with
belly.
like an AM FM. You mean
Yeah.
radio?
Yeah.
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 Okay.
So I get it. I turn it
Was it
on.
Tandy brand at
Andy
that?
was the one.
Tandy brand. Oh my goodness.
So I hang it up on my new porch that was very hard fought to get done. And I turn it on, and there's this show called The Neon Beat, and they're playing this song, Kansas City. So I email the guy, and I'm doing part-time journalism. We interview, and he's like, hey, man, his house was like blocks away from me. I didn't know it. He was an engineer by day for Entercom and had all this old equipment that he accumulated over the years. He said, come over, write a script. He knew I had a radio background, so I picked jazz. It was the best decision I ever made. And when I got there, I said, I'm going to interview jazz musicians. I'm not going to read encyclopedias and get into it. I'm going to get it from them. Jazz people are the nicest humans, the most evolved, talented people on the planet. I love them. There's such a strength and vitality in that community.
That's funny. I would imagine they were difficult because of all the drugs that flew through there and the lack of recognition. But what years are you talking?
I started in 2011, but I'm talking about any of these guys. Like Sonny Rollins was the most gentle.
I've heard Sonny Rollins is very nice.
He's unreal. Lou Donaldson was beautiful. Randy Weston was transformational. You know who was the most transformational, even spiritually speaking? Dr. Lonnie Smith. When I got off the phone, the complete vibration of reality changed for me. I was like, I can't believe he was like,
Wasn't he also a pastor? Or am I making that up? Or
I
just
think
kind of preaches?
he did have a spiritual backing. I think it was along the lines of Coltrane. There was a lover of spirituality and music
Mm.
that merged, and his vibration was just beautiful. But there was just, I mean, all of them. I've never run in, the only person that I've ever run into, and it wasn't directed at me, was a blind guitar player named Raul Menden. And it was during the pandemic, and he was done. He went on a blue streak, and I didn't think they wanted to use the interview. And his wife was his manager and said, no, use it, go for it. But other than that, everybody they're amazing humans, man. So kind, so confident, and so ready to pass the torch on to the next generation. All of the things we're taught in kindergarten are just heightened by this group of people.
Very cool.
Yeah. So anyway,
I had the only so what how did it work? I would have, the young guy had the bad slot and had this guy who wasn't in college. He was like a 40, mate. I don't know. He seemed older. Who knows how old he actually was? He would get the Friday interviews because he was an old timer.
yeah.
And so if people came to town, he would interview them on his Friday drive time show, let's say. Maybe it was a little later than drive time. But occasionally the timing wouldn't work out. So he'd bump one of our shows and we'd get to sit in on Branford Marsalis or Johnny Griffin. I think those were the only two I got in on. And that was fun.
Yeah.
Those were fun. Those
Yeah.
are fun.
It is.
Yeah.
It's so much fun. Well,
Yeah.
speaking of, let's have a little fun here. It's
Yeah.
great to
Let's have some fun.
Yeah, thank you for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it. I love your story, and I'm looking forward to delving into it. So again, thank you.
Yeah. 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 I'm excited to be interviewed by you. I've listened to your stuff and it's very thorough and thoughtful. So I'm excited. Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's begin with the subject that I think we're all getting fatigued by, but it's very instrumental, which is the whole COVID thing. That time period was quite a thing for all of us to live through. How did you get through it? And how has it changed the way that you approach life now?
That's a wow. I'm noticing in my body that made me sad thinking about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, oh God, I mean, I think we're still dealing with the aftershocks in our politics and emotional state, rage and unresolved grief, resentments, fear. I remember the fear, especially at the beginning for my kids. Um, I mean, it was in some ways the nail in the coffin of my pulpit career, which I think had been kind of fading and less exciting to me as the years went on. And then the things that I loved about it, the handheld parts of it disappeared for so long. There was no personal connection, and it was all meetings and distance teaching, learning, speaking. That really was the final burnout for me. I didn't know what was happening within. I thought maybe I needed to divorce. I was fantasizing about faking my own death and getting out of here. And it just turned out that the job was over. This job that I had loved for 10 and then 12 years. And I had a dim sense of what to do next that had germinated from various small experiences. But I think the benefit of COVID and the Zoom era was that a thing that didn't seem like a full-time profession could be a full-time profession, reaching from, Vancouver to Atlanta in scope and reach. So in order to counsel artists directly, which I'd done a drop of in LA and a bit of here and there, the assumption was you needed to be New York, LA, London, Chicago, and I didn't want to move. We love where we live in Knoxville, Tennessee. We're very happy here. My kids have all grown up here, all born here. But now I counsel people in Austin and Boston and Philadelphia, and work with arts projects in Minnesota and LA. And so that sort of telescoping of reach and the capacity to counsel, preach, teach to people at a distance. I do meditation events Wednesdays and Sundays, and I think people have shown up from India and Brazil. That's been very exciting. And at the same time, a little hard, because there are people I've sort of developed relationships with that I've never met.
Yeah.
I mean, I met online as I'm meeting you, but I can't give you a hug. I can't have coffee with you. I can't make you a meal. Can't go for a walk. Right. So the relationship is all mediated through zeros and ones and whatever you show me in your background and whatever you reveal, but there's no context.
True.
And there's no community, which is a plus and minus, because I think when I was a pulpit rabbi, a thing I didn't like was navigating people's relationships to each other.
Yeah.
Like, I like having a relationship with you. I like having a relationship with her. But your relationship with her suddenly became my business when I was a pulpit rabbi. And I didn't enjoy that by the end. That I found stressful. But returning to the arts has been pretty incredible. I started, my dad started playing piano a few years ago, and I hope he doesn't hear this, but he's not very good. I think he knows he's not very good. He's in his 70s, just plunking out a few notes. My kids are already, moving past him. And partly in that, and partly in working with artists and asking them to do things, I started playing drums finally. I've wanted to play drums since I was a kid. And as a jazz head, I'm guessing we've both seen Elvin Jones play. Yeah. My God. And so many great drummers, and just the joy a human being feels on banging on things. And I love to dance. So I started playing drums this summer. I don't think I would have gone into that. I don't think I would have taken some of the risks I'm taking before COVID. And I think that's what it did to a lot of us was, if I can die tomorrow while I'm in this marriage or this house or this job that's killing me slowly, or addiction or whatever it would be.
Right? Yeah. It was definitely that Robert Frost poem. It was definitely the fork in the road to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
So let's get to the heart and soul here in 2024 of what you do for a living. If I put you in front of a bunch of third graders at career day and one of the kids was like, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer?
My fourth grader answered this for me, because it is very hard to describe. He said, "You are an artist's coach." Yeah. And I said, "Yeah, you're right. But, even in sports, I've had bad coaches." And I think that the field of coaching writ broadly is a very mixed bag. It's a little bit of a Wild West, where you have people who are in it for the money and people who are in it for the spirituality and people who really have something to give and people who are 24 and just winging it. And so I still think of myself as a rabbi to artists, and to seekers. But it looks a lot like coaching. If you have the familiarity, it looks like spiritual direction, which is more of a Catholic and other ecumenical process. I'm also doing a little bit of small group and group creation and community building, but I don't have any interest in institution building. It looks a little bit like sponsorship for an alcoholic or other people in addiction. But I still think of myself as a rabbi. A client the other day said to me, "Thanks for looking out for me." And I think that's what rabbis do. We look out for the people around us and we help them solve their problems. And for me, I've just picked a very specific congregation, community of artists, and not so specific that it's, essayists and rappers and painters and sculptors, tattoo artists. It's very broad based in terms of what the art is and what the context is, but it's people who want to create. And that's really just been delightful. Yeah.
Well, no, I was just going to say, being a guy from the Midwest that didn't grow up in any specific denomination, it's been more kind of open, and I've always kind of opened myself up to different theologies. Buddhism always comforts me, but there's tenets of Christianity, and there's, Hinduism and all of these other things. But for me, looking from the outside in without being involved a lot, rabbis always comfort me. There's always a more broad scope that goes into what you do. You embrace so many things in a very open way, and it's like there's just a rawness that goes into it that's always comforted me. And I always appreciate it. I just want you to know up front that every time I talk to somebody that's a rabbi, or that's in that level of thought, it's almost like you're a lawyer of theology. You know a little bit, or if not more, about a lot of things, and you come to it unabashedly, because there's certain religions that just don't broach certain things, or they don't get into it, or they don't delve into it. But
Yeah.
rabbis always seem to me as though, you know what? I got hands that get dirty, so let's do it. Let's get into it. It's just
I,
comforting.
I hope so. I mean, I think I've met one or two bad rabbis, but I've met so many wonderful ones. And for me, they were the ones who kept me alive through difficult adolescence and gave me wisdom, and were people I looked up to. So yeah, that's what I wanted to become, and give back. I don't want to. I'm never one to say there aren't bad rabbis and there aren't bad aspects to any faith or any system. But I've been very happy. I had a Lutheran say to me about 10 years ago. I was really nervous when he was about 6. He says, "You know what I noticed about Jews?" And I was like, "Oh, this is going to be bad." He says, "Y'all have a very high tolerance for paradox." And I was like, nailed it on the head. I mean, because if you look at the Talmud and the way you describe lawyer, it's like, it's very much about logic, but unresolved problems and questions that they'd prefer to leave ambiguous. And so when people come to you with questions about the afterlife, about God, about charity, the answers are much more nebulous, not nebulous in a bad way, but open-ended, I think is what you were describing.
Yeah.
And then I do think, contrary to, if I put myself in the helping position now, helping profession now, unlike my therapist, like I can give you advice, right? And what a colleague said, her grandfather used to say of her, "You'll be good at helping people solve their problems." Like, I don't solve the problem, but I can help you find the resources within yourself and externally to solve the problem and to see it differently. And that's delightful for me. And then to do it specifically with like, oh, the bridge of this song really isn't working, and why? Like, what are you holding back? You really delve into this emotionally vulnerable place in the verse of the chorus, and then the bridge, you kind of turn it all into a joke. Why? Right? Or this edge of the painting is like, why aren't you using more red? What are you afraid of with that color, with that rawness? So yeah, I love what I do. I loved rabbinical school. I love being a rabbi. I love working with artists. I've been one of those lucky people, for whom it doesn't feel like much work.
Well, and it emanates from you. And the interesting thing about you is that, as you mentioned, with drums and writing and everything that you do, you have this right and left brain realm of you that can understand both sides of it.
Yeah.
Take me back to childhood. What did you want? Did you always want to be a rabbi? What was your dream growing up?
Well, I want to go back to what you said, which is, yeah, I used to be very analytical and math and science skilled, and I had to build up the listening, the interpersonal skills. I wasn't always so well balanced. If we're going to talk about my childhood, I was a very nerdy kid. Like, did not have social skills. Was surprised recently that I'm not on the autism spectrum. I look at and I'm surprised one of my kids isn't, because he seems very indifferent to social niceties. Very good with, the raw computational power, reading, math. A lover of the nerdy, which in the 80s was not as popular. Stranger Things makes it look like Dungeons and Dragons was cool back then, or acceptable. It was not acceptable.
Right.
Huge fan of the band Rush. Loved Marvel Comics. I mean, I always think of those. Okay. That's the nerd triumvirate, at least in the 80s, was Rush, 100%. Marvel Comics, and D&D.
Yes.
And you kept it to yourself. Stephen Colbert. Secrets. Yeah. Stephen Colbert said, and I can't believe this isn't true now, if you wanted to play D&D in the 80s, you needed 3 friends who could keep a secret.
Yeah, that's true.
And so, nerdy childhood, socially awkward. It didn't really shift until high school, when I did a little football, wrestling, went abroad, had relationships in my youth group, had my first, romantic relationships, first deeper friendships. College certainly helped, where I was in a more academically stimulating environment, didn't have to hold back, but also got to experiment being a jazz DJ and doing dance and filmmaking, and into some leadership positions. So, but it was a conscious effort, right? Building communication skills was a conscious effort. I remember learning to listen to people and things, right? I realized a couple of months ago, I was always good at hearing. Like, I always had a deep hearing for music, but listening was something I needed to practice. And maybe it was anxiety, maybe it was a little of a distractibility, maybe it was nervousness, social nervousness, but I practiced listening. And what I like about being a rabbi, and I've always liked, is it's a position that forces you to be your best self. And it may start by feeling unnatural, but it is something you can work on, right? You always have to be the grown-up in the room. And I thought that was really good effort. And I also liked, it's natural in a human life to love a half dozen, maybe a dozen people, but in a synagogue, I had 300 people I had to give love to.
Yeah.
It was very unnatural, but very worthwhile learning to do. And now I'm working on doing it for my own family, because that tends to be, where you miss out. Right.
Of all of the people that I've interviewed about Miles Davis, and I try to dance around it because you don't want to take someone's artistry and just engulf it in this legendary figure. But the thing that I've learned the most out of all of the interviews is that Miles Davis was an unbelievably impeccable listener.
Well, yes, he talks about that, right? I mean, he talks about music being between the silence, and the story about, John Coltrane saying, how do I play, you play short solos and I can't stop playing. Davis says, you just take the horn out of your mouth. Right. But I do get that sense, right? He wasn't a flashy player, but he was probably listening. And you get that in the notes to Kind of Blue, about the whole process of arts making. I think it's in Kind of Blue in the notes, they talk about a Japanese art form with really flimsy paper, so that if you rushed it or were careless, you ripped the paper.
Yeah.
I always thought that was a great metaphor for a lot of life. Yeah. I mean, that's jazz, jazz always requires listening.
Yeah.
I think deep listening and compassion. I've never found the recording again, but there's a recording. I think it's a live recording of Charles Mingus and Eric Dolphy kind of talking to each other.
Uh-huh.
They're not exactly trading fours, but they're literally like, you can almost hear on the bass he's saying, "Hello, Eric," or something. Like, there's almost words that you can almost hear.
Yeah.
I don't remember where that is, but it's such a beautiful dialogue. It was almost literally a dialogue.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. There was someone I interviewed at one point that was, her album was about bird sounds and mimicking it. And Eric Dolphy lived in LA and used to go out in his backyard and literally would play to the sound of the birds. That's how he refined.
No way.
Oh yeah. Isn't that mind blowing? Like, that was what he would do. Literally, he would go out and mimic it, and think about how he did his horn.
Yeah. I mean, I've always thought birds are teaching us something. I think there's even lines in Proverbs like that. I think also Andre 3000 in his new flute project talks about things like that.
Yeah.
But what you're also describing is a playfulness, right? And that's, I think for Dolphy, like, that was always it for me. He was so playful. And when you combine that with Coltrane's intensity, it was such a good combination. Those albums that it was really a quintet with them, those are probably my favorite. Where you have those two voices, and then Elvin and McCoy filling it out. Oh God, good stuff. Good stuff.
They just came together well.
Yeah.
So I just want to do a quick precursor here. We've run away with this half hour. Is there any way we can have a part two?
I mean, I can keep going if you want to do it now, or you need to
Well,
reset.
I have to I have a 9 o'clock, but I
That's
don't
fine.
want to rush anything, and I want to make
Yeah,
sure
yeah. I
everything
don't
in.
know. I have a relatively flexible schedule. If you want to shoot me some times, or
Yeah,
yeah, I'd
sure.
love
Yeah.
to. Love
Yeah,
to.
we can just do it on Calendly.
We
So,
probably shouldn't be talking so much about jazz if you want to focus.
well, some
I can get away with music. I mean, I can go on tangents about music.
well,
Oh,
sometimes we needed to warm the oven up. So we need a
okay.
little bit of time. And now we're going to cook the meal and then we'll have to eat
Sure.
next time. So
With delight. With delight.
we're
Yeah.
going to get
Yeah.
to it. So
Do you
we'll
want to talk
just
about a little more today and then just do some calendaring offline?
yeah, we'll do calendaring offline. So yeah, we'll just kind of bring this to kind of we're gonna to be continued at this point, and we'll get back to it,
Okay.
and I'll send you over that link. But it was so great to establish and to get into it, and
Yeah.
I'm enjoying this so much. I want to make sure that we get to the heart of everything.
You
And
should probably put some brackets on the side for me so I don't start going off about, Eric Dolphy and Jimi Hendrix and Jackson Pollock and the meal I ate yesterday. So, yeah.
we're gonna
Yeah.
put bowling bumpers up here. Yeah, and I
That's what I'm
gotta
thinking.
say, before we get out, the one thing that's interesting whenever I hear adults talk about, whether it could be spectrum or any of that, my son's 19 and he's on the spectrum, so I've lived in that world. He has one extra long arm on his 15th chromosome, and it's led to a myriad of developmental delays. So I've been accustomed to that world for quite a while now. So
I was shocked. The only thing in our family is a little bit of ADD because we are crazy. And in the best, so it just turns out I'm garden variety weird.
yeah.
That's what I learned
Yep.
about. I was like, oh, I needed an explanation and I'm just weird. So
Well,
yeah, I have a little bit of synesthesia. I realized later.
okay. Okay.
That's I get to see patterns. It looks a lot like what's behind you when I listen to some Coltrane records.
Oh,
So
I love it. Yeah, I'm a
yeah,
visual artist, so that's one of my
that's
originals.
yours. It's
Yeah,
really good. I really like that.
I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I've been painting for quite a while now, and that original one, my wife's a high school English teacher. It's in her room right now, so it's uh
It's great.
it's
It's really nice.
it's good therapy. Thank you. I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
yeah.
Well, we're gonna have part two. We'll catch up officially part two. And what I want to know is how did you get to where you're at today with this acumen and this level of giving and helping people? Take me back to the moment you knew that this was your calling.
It's really funny because I don't think of myself as particularly helpful or I mean, I suppose I'm generous, more so through being a parent. I remember talking to friends in college who were going into banking and said, I'm going to do the Peace Corps first and then I'm going to sell out and then I won't have any qualms. It has never worked out that way. Although I had a really strong mathematical bent and could have worked in a hedge fund, I realized later. Um, I guess there's just a combination of things I enjoy doing. I enjoy human interaction, and I've always been seeking after what is human. What is the shared experience of all humans? What is different between them and among them? Um, Although I have strength, probably innately stronger in maths and humanities, maths and sciences, the humanities was always a drive for me. I wanted to become a more complete person. I could always hear, I realized recently, but learned to listen. And I think I'm just fascinated by human nature and what is good about us, what is bad, what is common, what is different. And in my younger, woolly 20s, I traveled more, so I was able to see more of the world. And now I think returning to work with artists is about leaving the institutional world behind and its sluggishness and working with people who are open to new experience and generally curious and playful and spontaneous in a way that appeals to a different part of my spirit. I this is sort of an inside baseball metaphor for people who play Dungeons and Dragons, but my first character sheet was a magic user. It was very logical, and then I added levels of Bard, the musical, and the artistic, and then I spent a long time developing the cleric, the spiritual, the ascetic, the wise, and now I'm returning to the Bard. Returning to my love of the art, the creative, the inner experience in that way. But it also, I think what's also happened for me in the past couple of years is that my spiritual experience diverged from traditional Jewish practice and traditional institutional practice, where I wanted to have more time alone, more time in the woods, more time communing with the arts. It would have never, I don't know if it would never have been possible. It was difficult to explain to a congregation. Yes, I love the Talmud and the Torah. And also I find Shakespeare and Coltrane deeply spiritual, right? And Montana. And I think I needed a place and a way to express that. So, it was actually an idea of our family therapist. She said, "Oh, you're talking about freelance practice." And I said, "No, I guess private practice." So I started the idea of a private practice to artists using the spiritual. I hate the word spiritual technologies. People use that idea, but the spiritual gifts and skill set that I've developed and the knowledge base in a way to outreach to artists to help them reclaim their faith, that they can be people of faith, even if their spirituality is rooted in their experience of poetry, secular poetry.
Of all of the clients that you've had some big names, you've had a whole wide variety. What was one of the clients that you learned? I mean, because it's a two-way avenue. You're teaching, they're teaching you. Which one stands out as someone that you really grew a lot with? It may have been difficult, but you got to a place where it was sweet. Was there a client like that?
I think I grow from a lot of clients. I mean, I have, one of my first clients was a classmate of mine from college whom I was doing a pilot program. I started with about 10 sort of adjacent friends, my wife's colleague, a college classmate, someone I hadn't talked to in 10 years. And at one point, very early on, she said, "So, Rabbi, what's your art?" And I realized I couldn't just be a counselor. I also had to make art. So I started thinking about the writing I've done in a different way, the writing I want to do. I finally took on playing drums. I returned to some things I haven't done in a long time. And I started taking tabletop role play more seriously, or in a new way, thinking about it as a kind of art form that I was part of, and storytelling. That was one that really changed me. I've watched people, sometimes the people that start out with what seems to be the least promise explode. And I don't know that changes me as much as is very thrilling, to watch someone go from a place of darkness and lack of art production to a place of constant performance, regular art production, to watch people reduce their drug intake because they want to make more art, because they want to take their art more seriously. Not necessarily sober up, but get cleaner so that they can focus more on the drums. That's pretty beautiful. I don't know. The whole thing has transformed me. There are people I work with who are not explicitly artists, but where the conversation is much more about spirituality and life direction and soul. And watching them take steps as social entrepreneurs is also very exciting. I don't know. It would be hard to pinpoint a single client, because the whole experience of witnessing their transformation is really thrilling and delightful, and getting to hear, and then there's the delightful experience of like hearing the demo before anyone, or maybe just the wife, heard the demo or sees the painting,
Yeah.
sending me a new chapter and getting to read it with them. Those are pretty wonderful.
Yeah. The one thing about you too is that you're dealing with artists, but you're also you're an artist, you're a creator.
I would say I'm a creative person. I'm a modestly successful artist.
Okay, there we go. That's perfect.
I've been surrounded by great artists my whole life, so I'm really uncomfortable taking on. I'm a modestly successful artist. I can still sing. I loved being a DJ. I love dancing, although I'm not like professional at it. And I could have been a better actor if I'd pursued it farther.
So let me ask you this. I know pride can be ugly, but I'm going to reshape it as, what is it that you've created that you're the proudest of in this life that you've had, of everything that you've evolved into, overcome, achieved, and become? What is it that you're the proudest of?
It would be a shortcut to say my kids,
Right.
but that's a real one, and especially the work that went into becoming a better parent and a better husband. My practice now, I'm extremely proud of. I have some writings that I'm very proud of. What's interesting about that experience, especially when you have a good editor, is that the writing is no longer yours after a certain point. You might submit, 5,000 words, and then the editor makes it even better. There are a couple of experiences of Dungeons and Dragons and other tabletop role play that I've been really proud of. I loved being a jazz DJ, and I think I was pretty good at it. I had an innate comfort with that and a love of the studio. Those are the big ones. And I'm sure there's others that will come up later, but those are the things that I've created. I was in a ballet of Dark Side of the Moon. I had a very small part, but I don't know. It was really fun. I guess it was really fun. I got to be in Shakespeare late in life. I always thought when my acting career kind of faded that I would never get to do Shakespeare. And then I was in seminary in Israel for a year, and there was a production of Taming of the Shrew that I got to be in. So I got to finally do Shakespeare. I was really proud of that.
What was the musician or instrument that you would play when you were a jazz DJ that was always something that brought you a lot of pleasure, that you were just like, they're on the show?
I don't think I ever did a show without John Coltrane.
Okay.
I did a lot of Charles Lloyd because that was my father used to see Charles Lloyd.
Yeah.
My father, when he was stationed in Monterey, he saw Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and then he would throw in and the Quicksilver Messenger Service and Charles Lloyd, like they were of equal stature to Hendrix.
Right.
I saw there was this club where I would see Joplin, Hendrix, and the Quicksilver Messenger Service, and I was like, "Who are they?" But he got me into Charles Lloyd, Eric Dolphy. I mean, Eric Dolphy, not necessarily solo records, but I would always try to find something he was playing on. I don't think there was a show where I didn't play Coltrane. I'm pretty sure that was that was an absolute for me. Regularly Dolphy, and sometimes Charles Lloyd would be like the third most frequent you'd hear.
I like it.
I was never as into Monk as I wish. I never connected with Monk as much. Jackie Byard I used to love. I just thought he was weird and fun. The Oliver Nelson albums, the Blues and the Abstract Truth. There were also albums like you could never go wrong popping on a certain those classic Blue Note records with the gorgeous album covers, and you'd be like, I'll put this on. This can't be that. This will never be that bad.
Yeah.
Right. Or if I'm busy and you just grab a track from Blues and the Abstract Truth, you knew that it would be a good track.
100%. 100%. So at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you in all these different capacities that you operate in. Family, friends, clients, but you have all these creative venues. But at the end of the day, you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I think I'm someone who likes to laugh. I think I'm perversely creative, like just creative in a way that is unusual and surprising even to me. Like it's just constantly thinking of ideas that people find surprising. I'm pretty open. I'm pretty open about my flaws and my discomforts and where I am successful. I'm more and more happy with less and less self-loathing and very little perfectionism left. I generally like my own company. I have days when I don't. I'm getting to be better as a father, and I still struggle with being a husband. That's not a role that fit naturally for me. I love being a rabbi in different contexts. Music lover, art lover. I used to be a serious cyclist. That's no more, but now I'm a serious walker, like long walks. I don't know. I mean, I think that I always wanted to be one of the Pips.
Yeah.
That I always make sure people know that for my funeral, to say that he wanted to be one of the Pips. I don't know. I love to laugh. I think that's the most salient feature of me. Like, I don't know that I am funny. Everyone thinks they're funny and everyone thinks they're a good driver. I just know that I love to laugh. I can tell you that for sure.
So we get off the call, time machine pulls up in front of your house. You can go anywhere in the history of time and see one event with your own eyes. And it won't put a tear in time. It'll be benign and safe. But what would you love to have seen?
There's a lot of things. I'd have to order. I mean, I'd love to see some of the discussions that led to the Talmud.
Yeah.
I'd love to see the night they did a Love Supreme.
Yeah.
Can I meet people also in this scenario? Totally. Like, can I meet JFK? I can meet JFK.
Yeah.
Obviously assassinate Hitler. Uh, no, I don't know. I mean, and I'd have to be fully vaccinated, but I would like to go back in time and see like the early part of the Common Era when Jesus was preaching and the rabbis were organizing their ideas into what would become the Mishnah, and the Jewish community in what was Roman Judea was in turmoil, and all of those peoples we talk about through Jewish history. I don't think I'd want to go to the Warsaw Ghetto, but there was a rabbi that in the Warsaw Ghetto in World War II, the Jews of that community created incredible social services that were kind of spiritual resistance, including one rabbi, economist Kalman Shapiro, who was preaching to them through their sorrow and distress. There are definitely other points in history that I've been very curious about. I think a lot of it is 20th century. I mean, to meet Cormac McCarthy, to be around at the genesis of a lot of art, I think would have been incredible to me. And those communities of art that were really intense, like Black Mountain in North Carolina. I mean, I'm not so interested in the Impressionists as a form, but the schools of Impressionists that were happening in France in I think that's the 1860s. Yeah. I don't know, the Stax Records. I just was watching a documentary about Stax Records, to be in the studio with Steve Cropper and Otis Redding.
Yeah.
The civil rights movement.
Yep.
My dad was in one of the marches in Selma, and I always was sort of in awe of that, being at that moment. It's a lot of mid 20th century.
Yeah.
I want a polio vaccine. I'm not going unvaccinated.
Yeah, right.
Totally. And I know that going back in time is only a good option for white men. So to be fair about that, but yeah.
So
I think I'm going to default to the night they did a Love Supreme in '64. To be in that room.
Wow.
But also, and then the second would be to like meet some of the rabbis at the Talmud when they were organizing their thoughts.
So one of the coolest Coltrane stories I ever heard was from the great Terry Gibbs. I interviewed him, and I remember he called me up and said, "Dimino, have you read my biography?" And I was like, "No, I haven't." "Read it before we talk." And so I get on Amazon, and it's expensive. There was not a lot made. I get it. And we have this interview, and it's one of my favorites of all time. We have the same birthday. He just turned 100 this year. And
are you 100? You look great for 100. Yeah.
So he's telling me he's on the road with John, and Alice like catches wind, and she was very shy, and she would sit in the back of the club, and he saw them fall in love, and it was just like, wow,
that's really sweet.
So she was like in a little like
that's very cool.
The back of the club, and John's up there playing. John was painfully shy. She was shy, but he just saw all the hearts going up in the air. And that's my favorite Coltrane story of all time. So again, we ran away with our time, but I want to make sure.
Delightful.
It's awesome. I want to steer everyone towards your world. Where's the best place for people to go to reach out and to see everything?
eclecticcleric.com. You can sign up for a free consultation. We'll do a phone consultation for 20-30 minutes. No obligation. You can find me at Eclectic Cleric on most of your socials, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, even TikTok, which I think my sole subscriber is my 13-year-old son. The only one who comments on my videos is my 13-year-old son. And it's mostly gibberish as far as I can tell. Their slang feels like it's invented by AI. Like, yeah. I have no idea where their slang comes from. It's very odd slang.
It is.
Yeah. I don't mean to be a grumpy old man, but I think their slang is stupid.
It's very computer generated. I get it.
It feels that way. Yeah. 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 At Eclectic Cleric or www.eclecticcleric.com is the two best places to reach me. My professional site or on socials.
So. I love it. This has been wonderful. This is part 2.
Always wonderful, Joe. Thank you.
So let's, if you don't mind, let's catch up here in a few months, 2 or 3 months. After this whole election, and let's work through it a little bit.
Okay.
We'll just work through the world. It'll be a part of it, but I'd love to catch up. Just see where we're at.
I just don't even want to think. I'm trying to go the whole week without thinking too much.
Believe me, I totally get it. This has been delightful. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Joe.
Have a wonderful day.